Quarantine, stay at home, shelter in place, safer at home, and lockdown all are common words and phrases used in today's global crisis. What's the difference in it all? Well, that depends on what part of the world you're in. Hello, I'm Sky Keith, and welcome to my quarantine. Through social media, everyone witnessed the draconian measures the CCP used to contain the coronavirus when it first emerged in Wuhan, China. After a month-long of cover-up, the CCP locked down the city of 11 million people and at least 15 other cities. That's about 46 million people on lockdown. The world watched while the Italian government launched an all-out battle against the coronavirus outbreak. In a desperate move, they locked down the entire country, home to over 60 million people. I'm sure many of us were wondering if that was coming to the United States, or maybe if we were even foolish enough to think that would ever happen here. It did. The world population stands at 7.8 billion, more than 2.8 billion people around the world. Almost 70 countries and territories are now living under some form of lockdown due to the coronavirus, including the United States. So how did the United States get all the freedom-loving Americans to go into lockdown? Public health officials attempted to mitigate the panic by teaching us the language of pandemics. Phrases like containment through social distancing or flattening the curve. While testing and social distancing is the best method to stop community spread, the problem is lack of testing. The administration's attempt to mitigate panic was similar to the cover-up in China. After waiting a month or more of downplaying the virus, testing needed for the containment was slow to get off the ground. The only way to contain the virus and to see the true area in which the virus had spread was testing and contact tracing, which was a failing. And as such, the administration's containment measures failed also. The virus had spread from coast to coast, and the next step was mitigation. An all-government approach left many of the state governors on their own to defeat the invisible enemy. Without adequate testing to find the virus, the only option many states had was to go into lockdown. In the U.S., all non-essential services have been ordered to close temporarily. That raises the question of what qualifies as essential. Even the most restrictive measures typically exclude emergency services, hospitals, banks, gas stations, pharmacies, and grocery stores from mandatory closures. Beyond that, what is essential varies between jurisdictions. In the United States, some states consider cannabis and liquor as essential services while in lockdown. In Europe, wine stores are considered essential in France, while newsstands remain open in Italy. The word quarantine originates from quarantina, a Venetian word meaning 40 days. This is due to the 40-day isolation of ships in the year 1448 that people practiced for disease prevention. related to the plague. According to the data, the bubonic plague had a 37-day period from infection to death. COVID-19 symptoms may appear anywhere between 2 and 14 days after you contracted it. Estimates suggest COVID-19 symptoms tend to appear around 5 days after exposure. If you have traveled to and from an area with an outbreak, you need to be quarantined for 14 days for possible onset of symptoms. If that period passes without any signs of symptoms, it is considered safe to assume the person quarantined wasn't infected. If you're showing any symptoms of COVID-19 and you think you've been exposed or in contact with someone with the virus, the CDC recommends calling your doctor first before showing up to get tested. They'll be able to determine if it's worth it for you to come in and receive testing at that time. If you've tested positive for COVID-19, but your symptoms are not serious enough to require hospitalization, doctors may order you to isolate in your own home, avoiding all contact with other people. These efforts come at a frightening economic cost. As in-person contact became difficult, entire industries, airlines, restaurants, tourism, and more had to shut down. Millions of workers lost their jobs. The stock market tanked, and bankruptcies loom for both households and corporations. Even with a high price tag, Americans will pay the price to avoid even greater human tragedy. But eventually, we must consider ways to lift lockdown and safely go back to work. It's essential to use this time to prepare for how to do that. The most important policy for achieving an end to lockdowns remains mass testing. COVID-19 cases are often asymptomatic but still contagious, a fact that far too many people in our society don't seem to get. You don't have to be displaying symptoms to be a threat. There can be no substitute for a widespread testing approach. We have made substantial progress in this direction, including more testing capabilities and shorter turnaround times, but we still need a good testing and contact tracing strategy to reopen. Social distancing will lessen the likelihood that you will contract this virus, and more importantly, that you will not give it to someone else. Temperature checks have now become a regular part of life across many Asian countries. Many employers recently mandated their daily use for employees. Masks are another important part of mitigation. Masks worn in public are commonplace in Asia, and that's increasingly apparent that they offer a containment benefit. The level of uncertainty makes it difficult to draw any conclusions, but it's important to have a public debate about a planned approach to reopen the country, ending lockdown in a safe way. The hope is that in this time of isolation, when we put an emphasis on physical distancing and testing, people will maintain contact through email, telephone calls, video conferencing, and other forms of communication. This is essential to the mental health of the human race to avoid feelings of loneliness and isolation while in lockdown with 2.8 billion people